So quick introduction. My name is Vivian. I'm one of the representatives for IGDA Sweden, and today I have Richard Bartle with us to talk about designing virtual worlds. So most of you, having come from game dev, you would actually already be familiar with his name. You may not know the face, but you most likely, almost definitely know the name due to the Bartle's taxonomy. I'm sorry. So this is the guy behind the taxonomy, and he's going to be talking about designing virtual worlds. Okay, so I will just hand you over to him now.
Oh, right. Hello, folks. Yes, I'll sort of be talking about designing virtual worlds, but also wider games in general. So it's not just virtual worlds that I'll be talking about. I've got a presentation, so I'll crank up my screen. Let me just share screen. Right, hopefully you're looking at a black and white screen with realisticness on it. If you're not, then I expect that I'll hear from Vivian very loudly very soon. Okay, so yeah, so I'm going to be talking about realisticness, why the virtual tends towards the real, and why that's important. So this talk is about why virtual worlds have so much in common with reality. I'll be calling them MMOs today because that doesn't take up as many characters on the screen as virtual worlds does. And yeah, IGDA is about games, so MMOs, yeah, okay, so no Second Life here or anywhere else coming for that. Now, if you think about it, MMOs don't have to be similar to reality at all. You could introduce whatever physical rules you like. You could have gravity working by colours. You could give multiple poles to magnets. You could make all solids be like jelly. And in the text versions of this, which we had like 40 years ago, I may have been involved in, they're already multidimensional. Some of them already refer to colours or smells that reality doesn't have. They contain new states of matter that do things reality doesn't. They've got undefined shapes, sometimes deliberately, sometimes accidentally. So we can do all these things. But the very reason that players prefer graphics to text, well, the ones who can see that is, and I guess the blind players probably prefer text to graphics, that hints at the answers, because graphics are more realistic than text. For graphics, you've got millions of years of evolution behind in your cortex behind it, and because of that, images are very easy to process so long as they look like what you were looking at when you evolved the ability to look at it. So when you look at something on a screen, immediately your eyes can parse it, and that makes it feel more real, or at least more persuasive that what you're looking at is real. And this is why VR is supposed to be so much better, because it swamps all your visual senses, so it gives a greater impression of being real. But there is more to it than this, because the world can still have photorealistic graphics and yet be unrealistic. Now, here are some Mikoti that I encountered while I was playing Final Fantasy XIV. So there's 8 of them there, which I selected from my several thousand screenshots, because these ones are all wearing glasses. Okay, now that isn't exactly photorealistic, but nevertheless it looks more like it might be real than a word does. Now, all of these characters have got ears on the top of their heads, but they wear glasses as if they had ears where humans have them. Now you see that this one here, she's got regular red glasses on, but they go on and they rest on these non-existent ears because their ears are up here. Now, why is that? Well, some explanations possible. One of them is, oh, oops, yep, you're right, we hadn't spotted that, oh dear. Another one is, well, we could have given them glasses that sort of went up here, but that would kind of look weird. Another one is, well, for pragmatic purposes, we want to use the same model for glasses for all the different character races. So we don't want to put them differently because then we have to have twice as many models for glasses. Another one is saying, well, you'll find out why it's like this later. Maybe later you'll find out that they've got little studs sticking out the side of their heads. I mean, they don't, because some of these Mikoti are bald and you can see that they don't. But maybe there's an explanation later on. You could also be saying something about the game by doing this, or you could be saying something about real life by doing this, which I'll come to later. Now, all fictional worlds contain what are truths about for them, but they're not truths to us. So if you're reading a book, a Sherlock Holmes book, then Sherlock Holmes is a person in that book. But in the real world, in reality, Sherlock Holmes isn't a person, but he is in the fictional world. A mother and a daughter are looking for love. That's pretty well 50% of the movies that were made in Hollywood in the 1990s. You lead a civilization. That's from a computer game, Civilization. Now, the fiction of a novel or a movie or a game is the premise that you've got to accept if you want to invest yourself into its world. So if you want to play the game, this is what you have to believe. The fiction is what you have to believe. You have to accept as being true in order to play. But what about things that the fiction doesn't mention? So there's nothing in Sherlock Holmes that says you've got to believe in this fictional detective called Sherlock Holmes and that ice exists. Well, you think, well, ice already exists, so why wouldn't I believe that? Well, the default is that if the fiction doesn't cover it, then whatever it is works just like reality works. So unless the fiction says otherwise, you can assume that Queen Victoria was a person, people live in the USA, horses can't shoot arrows. But the fiction might imply otherwise. So if it was set in Lord of the Rings, then Queen Victoria isn't a person. There is no USA, so people don't live in it. Horses probably still can't shoot arrows, though. So if the fiction doesn't cover it, then it defaults to the settings of reality. And the more you diverge from how reality would do something, then the more it's going to be a distraction. Anything that's counterintuitive adds cognitive load. So that makes the game harder to play because you've got to keep remembering all these things that are different from reality. Reality is what you've learned to accept so far in your life, and you've got all this evolution behind you to make it a lot easier to accept things that match reality. Now, that's my... Oh, I know what's happened. There we go. Now, conversely, the more that you make a fictional world like reality, so you make a world that's not real, but then you try and bring in more aspects of reality to give the impression that it maps onto reality, then the more natural and persuasive it will be. Tolkien wrote about this, about how if you want to make what he called secondary world believable, then you had to make it map onto the primary world. And this is why when you read his books, you'll suddenly come across these things telling you how ferns are turning brown because it's coming into autumn, and all these other things which really add a lot of detail but don't really advance the plot much. So what about things that you have in fiction, whether it's games or movies or books, that neither the premise you've accepted nor the defaults of reality cover? So Sherlock Holmes' assistant Watson limps in the wrong leg. In one book he limps in one leg, and in another book he limps in the other leg. Germans are speaking to each other in English. Germans don't normally speak to each other in English, especially if they're in Germany. They're probably going to be speaking German. Arrows fly further than they should, 20, 25 kilometers. Okay, well, now it gets interesting. So there's some explanations. The reason Watson walked in the wrong leg is because Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the books, forgot which leg he'd used previously. So he said that he guessed the wrong one. The reason that Germans speak English to each other is when the intended audience, whether it's a game, an MMO, a movie, understands English, doesn't understand German. Well, that's why. And long range arrows make for better gameplay. This is Civilization 5. If you look carefully there in the middle, you can see that there are two sets of archers. One in Dover, although it's called London there, and one in Calais, and they're shooting each other across the English Channel. Yeah, it doesn't scale right, Civilization 5. Now, although we understand why they're there, we know why these things that we've just seen are there. They've got easy explanations. They're unsatisfactory. And that's because they poke holes in the fabric of the fictional world. You've got this great fictional world, and then you put all these holes in it because of memory problems, human error, or because you want people to be able to understand what's going on, or because it's boring if you don't do that, or in Civilization 5's case, boring if you do that in many cases. So we just have to accept things as they are and move on. Now, the very reason that games in general and MMOs in particular defer to reality is because we understand reality. And if we understand the nature of the world, the physics of the world, then we can make deductions about why things are. But we can't make them if there's random unspecified rules of cause and effect that might not apply to it. In fiction theory, this is called the principle of minimum departure, for those of you who've read on fiction theory or are wondering why I haven't mentioned it. Well, there you go. Oh, this is the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. It's the world's largest unbroken volcanic caldera. It must have been a big volcano. Anyway, a world's fiction explains the exceptions to the expected. The expected is normally how the real world works, although a bit later on I'll mention how an alternative interpretation. Out of fiction explanations, like Watson, Conan Doyle forgot which leg, they are to be avoided. And the reason they're to be avoided is because they mean that the players can't trust the designer. That's important because players who can't trust the designer, who don't have any faith in the designer, have no faith that anything that they see that looks strange has an in-fiction explanation. And if they have no faith that something that looks strange has an actual explanation, then they won't look for an explanation, even if it really does have an in-fiction explanation. If you're saying, aha, we don't normally have caves on the side of hills. Normally we only put them behind waterfalls, but this one's on the side of a hill. The players will notice that and think there's something odd. And yes, the players will notice that and think there's something odd. They'll think you've made a mistake because they don't trust you. But if they do trust you, they'll think, whoa, that's odd. Normally we only see caves behind waterfalls. There must be something special going on here. I shall approach with caution. Now, if players see something that's got no in-fiction explanation, they've got two choices. They'll either reject it because they think it's got some out of fiction explanation, or they'll accept it because they trust that an in-fiction explanation is forthcoming. So that's what you really want them to be doing, because that gives them an investment in the virtual world. It gives them a sense that their observations are meaningful. It makes the world coherent, and it also strengthens their sense of immersion. They are actually in a virtual world. Now, this is important because in the first one, players would just see the game as a game and not as a world. The second one, they would see it as a world, and that's what you need to happen if you want players to become immersed. Immersion is one of those woolly concepts that nevertheless is pretty well why people play virtual worlds. They want to become immersed. Any MMO designers who don't rate immersion are probably should be designing something other than MMOs. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be a problem for a strategy game or something, but it is a problem for MMOs. I'm going to give you an example of what I mean here, and this is from Game of Thrones, a television series, so that I don't insult more games than I need. I don't know if you've seen Game of Thrones. If you haven't seen it, you're probably not going to see it now. But if you have seen it, well, you don't need a spoiler alert. One of the things about it is its main characters almost never wear anything on their heads. You might see a crown, you might see a little crown, you might see a hood. But even if they're in the middle of a battle, they won't be wearing a helmet. If they're in the middle of an icy wasteland, they won't be wearing one of those woolly Russian hats. If they're in a desert, they won't have any kind of silk head covering or a parasol or anything. I mean, they never cover their heads. Their other clothes are very highly detailed. You know, there'll be individual stitching on the belts, which is reminiscent of some 3 lines in the book 200 pages earlier. But their headwear, that's just not there. Now, fans noticed this, and they complained it wasn't realistic. Okay, well, they're saying it's not realistic in a fantasy book. One of the things about Game of Thrones is it's really big on dragons, and dragons also don't feature in reality. But the fans didn't complain about the dragons; they complained about headwear. Why didn't they say, dragons, that's unrealistic? But they did say, no hair, no heads. Well, some of them didn't have hair, but no hats. Some of them didn't have heads either after a few episodes. Anyway, why did they complain about headwear, but they didn't complain about dragons? Well, the dragons were explained by the fiction, but the bad choice of hats wasn't explained by the fiction. Now, suppose that the Game of Thrones showrunners, so that's the equivalent of the designers, had been asked to explain why headwear was a joke. What could they have answered? Well, there's a number of possibilities. Here's 3. The first one is, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. We hadn't noticed. Oops. Sorry. Yes, thanks. We'll put them in headwear soon, next time. They could have answered, yeah, well, they should wear hats, but then instead of complaining about lack of headwear, you'd be complaining about the fact you couldn't tell them apart, because if everyone's wearing a helmet, how do you tell one from another? That's the actual reason, because the actor who played Jon Snow, Kit Harington, was out in Iceland and he was absolutely freezing in the snow and asked for a hat, and they said, no, everyone else gets one, but you don't, because otherwise we can't tell it's you. A third possibility is you introduce some fiction. Leaders in Westeros, that's their country, don't wear hats to show that they are the leaders. You could make it that not wearing a hat is a status symbol to show that you are stronger than the people you're leading, that you're more in command than the people you're leading. You're the one who's able to take the punishment that they can't. It's similar to why soldiers who are in a a country that they're defending. The United Nations soldiers will wear a cloth hat rather than a helmet to show the population that they're not there to shoot the people, and they're trying to make them feel safe. They put on the metal helmets if they think they're likely to, a bomb's likely to go off and kill them. So by not wearing a hat, it's sort of the opposite. Well, a similar thing. It's like saying, you are, I'm the leader because I'm not wearing a hat. You lot have to wear hats because you're not as brave as I am. Now, that would be a fiction that would work perfectly well, but it wasn't used. So the first two there are out of fiction. They're not satisfying. The third one is in fiction, and it's an in fiction explanation that covers the real reason, the second one, but it somehow is satisfying. So although you know that that's not the real reason that it's there, nevertheless, it's more satisfying. It's not going to make you feel cheated as much as the real reason, which is to do with cinematographical reasons. Now, whatever your answer is, though, as to why you should or shouldn't be wearing hats, there's one answer that is just flat out wrong. Fictional explanations keep the player within the fictional world, which you prefer because taking them out of it's unimmersive. But if you don't even give an out of fiction explanation, if you just say, don't worry your pretty little heads about it, just accept it like you do the dragons, that is wrong, and you should not do that. You shouldn't say to people, oh, this is unrealistic. Yeah, but you've got dragons. You don't complain that those are unrealistic, because if you do, then you're completely undermining your own fiction. If we did do that, if you did make this explanation for Game of Thrones in this case, then that would mean that the lack of headwear was important because dragons are important. If you say ignore it like you do the dragons, and that suddenly means, well, either the dragons are no more important than missing headwear, or missing headwear is as important as dragons. But you haven't got an explanation for that, so it must be the other one. Dragons aren't important, but dragons are important. So you're undermining your own world design here. If you've got fictional cover, if the designer has made an effort to explain why something is the way it is, then that makes for trust. Later on in Game of Thrones, Jon Snow falls into an ice-covered lake but manages to drag himself out. Now, there's no fictional explanation as to why he doesn't have hypothermia. Probably not the case in Sweden because you lot are hardy, but if I fell into a ice-covered lake, I would get hypothermia. I mean, I've come close to getting it in a shower in a hotel before, so, you know, I would be in trouble here. Anyway, Jon Snow just drags himself out and he's a bit wet, but yeah, that's worse. Now, why doesn't he have hypothermia? If you can trust the showrunners, then you can speculate as to what hidden fact is yet to be revealed. You don't just say, oh, he dragged himself out, but we haven't killed him because he's wearing plot armor. You say, maybe he's immune to cold, like Daenerys, his counterpart, is immune to fire. Maybe his sword, which we know is an old thing, is protecting him. Maybe there's something in the water warming it, and then we can expect the ice to melt. There's all manner of things that we could do. But if you can't trust them, then you can't speculate. There's no point in speculating this if you know that it's there for an arbitrary reason. There's no thought behind it. They've just put it in because they wanted it for the plot. This is Viva la Dirt League, New Zealand comedy troupe that does games things. I'm sure you've come across them. This is them playing PUBG, where they're talking about how it's so realistic, the way that the guns work and the way the camouflage and everything else works. And they're just saying how it's really nuanced and it's so realistic. While one's dressed as a bee, one's dressed as a clown, one's dressed as a rabbit. So there is some relativity to it there. Now I mentioned this because earlier I had but see later when I was talking about explanations. So what I said was that normally you would default to how the real world works if there's no fictional explanation as to why the virtual world is behaving like it does. But if you've played enough games that act the same way, then you can defer to that instead of the real world's way. So if you've already had your view of realisticness stressed because you've played games where things that weren't realistic happened, then you might come to believe that that's the default, that's how it works. So in real life, if you get shot in the head, it will kill you. Trust me. If you get shot in the head in the games, it typically doesn't kill. It might take a lot of hit points off you, but it doesn't kill you normally. In a game world, you don't need to go to the lavatory. In the real world, you do. Well, unless you've got very low standards of hygiene. In most virtual worlds today, if you drop an object on the floor, then it will destroy it. Well, actually, most MMOs, not so much things like Second Life. But if you drop an object on the ground, it will destroy it. So you take some out of your inventory, throw it on the ground, and it poof, disappears. Now, none of those things are how it works in reality, but players would expect that this is how it would work because this is what they've grown used to. Now, if you break these expectations, you will also break immersion. But because they've got the backup of how reality works, it's going to be only a quick one-off adjustment. Oh, in this game, dropping an object doesn't destroy it. Oh, in this game, I do need to go to the lavatory. Therefore, I shall not play it because it will be tedious. Oh, in this game, getting shot in the head will kill me. Maybe I should wear a helmet. This is a cartoon, children's cartoon, Arthur. I've just put this up to show that it's not just Miqo'te in Final Fantasy 14. This is even worse. This guy's not just got his glasses not resting on his ears on top of his head. He's got his headphones on over his non-existent ears. And, you know, children will watch that, take it all in, but what's going on there? The mere fact that this is a talking, I think he's a hamster, is irrelevant because we accept that that's part of the fiction, but we don't accept the fiction that his ears are on top of, So why was it that those Miqo'te that I showed earlier were wearing glasses? Why did they wear glasses? Few of these Miqo'te do wear glasses. They're not necessary for the fiction. They don't have to wear glasses. They just put some of them in glasses. And even if they were necessary for the fiction, why not a monocle? Why not pince-nez? In fact, some of them do wear pince-nez. You know, the ones that just stick on your nose, pince your nose, I suppose. If I spoke French, I'd understand that. Now, it's clear that these characters were given glasses to wear deliberately. It's no accident they were given glasses. They've actually been given glasses deliberately. They didn't have to. They could have just not given them glasses and then there wouldn't be the problem. It's not incompetence. People knew they were doing it. There's even a quest at one point where one of the Miqo'te can't see very well. You have to get her a new pair of glasses. You have to make a pair of glasses for her. So it's definitely known to the designers that this is a thing, but why would it be a thing? Well, the designer's telling us something. So Final Fantasy 14 takes place in a whimsical world. I mean, at times it is bonkers. There are mad things going on that just make no sense. Okay, I'm riding a giant chicken. Right, fine. Other people have got motorbikes. Other people have got cars. Other people have got flying mechs. But I'm driving a chicken, and it doesn't make any difference. Okay. cat people who are resting glasses on their non-existent ears is just one example of the bizarre world that this lives in. Now, such examples inform the player that they can't trust anything all the time. That's why they're there. They're saying to the player, look, this is a world of fun and whimsy, and we won't have that world without some of these non sequiturs. So it's safe to assume that for small things, we'll have some of these things in to keep the world light and friendly and happy. But for the big important storylines, then we can trust the designer. It's only at the low levels that the designer, well, if you see something that makes no sense, just go with the flow. But if you see something that makes no sense at a higher level, then that is important. This is related to a concept called lamp shading, which we get in anything with fiction. So this is a trick that writers will use when they do something or they've got something there that they know will affect the suspension of disbelief, in the words, that undermines the fiction. What it involves is, if you've got something that's implausible, you shine a light on it, you highlight it, and then you move on. And the writer's basically confessing, look, I know this is stressing the fiction. I know this shouldn't really happen, but just accept it. So if someone in Games of Thrones had said to Jon Snow, oh, so you haven't got hypothermia? And Jon Snow said, yeah, well, I keep having cold soreness. Well, okay, fair enough. That's a joke. We know that it doesn't explain it, but it does mean that the authors have noticed it, acknowledged the fact it's kind of iffy, and then just moved on. And this reassures the audience that the fictional world does work like the real one, because what it's saying is this thing that's weird in the real world is also weird in the fictional world. And look, we've pointed it out just so that you know that really it should work like the real world, but for reasons we've had to keep it in. Now, Final Fantasy XIV does do some lamp shading, and here's some examples. So at this point, the character's got a choice. The first one is, this is another one of those moments where it really doesn't matter what I have to say, isn't it? And the second one is, oh, sod this. So basically, they've put in a dialogue of no meaning, and they're acknowledging that it's got no meaning. Here's another one. The guy on the right saying, by the Kami, a talking turtle, when he is himself a talking turtle. So he's surprised that turtles can talk while being a turtle that can talk. What they're saying there is, okay, we know that it's a bit weird making turtles talk, so let's have the turtle who can talk say it's weird that the other turtle can talk, which is kind of weird anyway, because that turtle looks more like a tortoise, but still. Here's another example. So you've gone out thousands of what they call marms, which are like miles because they start with an M, or kilometers, whatever. From home, you've gone across, and it's been a real trip to get to this place. And now you're going to have to go on to into a small instance and defeat an enemy with a group of people. Except there you are in the middle of this island with two other people who have fought their way through, and suddenly you're going to go into an instance. Where are the other people in the instance going to come from? Well, who knows? She does have an awful lot of adventurer friends. Maybe some of them decided to take a fishing trip to the Far East and are surprisingly close by. In other words, we know this makes no sense, but we put this in to show that, well, we acknowledge the fact that at times this can be stressing the fiction a bit much, but at least that shows you that when we don't do this, you can trust the fiction. Now, the Mikoti glasses are not lamp shading, but they are there for similar reasons. They are there to bring attention to a diversity away from both the fiction and from how it ought to work. They're among the ways that the players learn where the boundaries are between what's important and what's unimportant. because it's a world of whimsy, determining what's superficial and what's deep is a necessary skill. You need to know when it's joking and when it's not joking. You don't want to be in the middle of a boss fight and then suddenly the boss starts, I was going to say dropping butterflies on you, but there is actually a fight where that happened. But you don't want things to happen that make no sense when it's important. So what they're showing here is the boundaries. By showing that character appearance isn't important, it's telling the player that you can ignore character appearance for gameplay purposes. Now, there's only two legitimate reasons for having something in a game world that's got no fictional cover. By legitimate, I mean reasons for having it without reasons for breaking immersion. I said earlier that it's either saying something about the game or it's saying something about real life. Now, both of these are essentially to do with the art of game design, the art of virtual world design in this particular example. I've just explained how Final Fantasy XIV shuns fictional cover to tell you something about the game. So by having no fictional cover, by just saying, look, here we go and make some glasses for this person who wouldn't ever wear glasses like that, it's telling you something about the game. It's saying this level of things, unimportant, you can revel in that. Don't worry about it because nothing's going to happen of consequence from this. But how can you say something about real life by breaking the fiction? Well, the fiction is quite often broken by putting things in that relate to real life, but overt references, things like Easter eggs, they're not examples of this. Just putting in something that looks a bit like real life, you know, the statue looks like the one in Rio de Janeiro, that's not an example of saying something about the real world. That's just a, oh look, pat yourself on the back, you noticed this while you were being unimmersed by it. If you name your crater in World of Warcraft after the one you based it on in Tanzania, what are you saying to players? We call this one Ngorongoro. No, we call this one Ungoro because it's similar to Ngorongoro, and those people who know of the existence of one will remember it. Yeah, but what are you saying to your players? What you're saying is that this isn't a self-contained reality. This is just a game. And if that's what you want to tell them, well, that's fine. They'll treat it as a game. They won't treat it as a virtual world, as what an MMO should be, if you want to gain its full powers. But if you want that, then that's fine. But whatever, it's going to cost you the integrity of your world because now you've broken the fourth wall, and it's costing you immersiveness because when people spot it, then they break it, they come out of their immersion. Now, the reason that Easter eggs and other real world elements, things like cash stores, don't count is that they're not art, or at least they're not the art of virtual worlds. The art of game design, and this includes virtual worlds, is carried by its gameplay, because that's all that games have that nothing else has. If you want to carry it in the imagery or the music, then you carry it, you write a movie or a symphony. The only thing that games have that nothing else has is gameplay, and that's where you have to carry the artistic payload. So a virtual world is not making the intangible tangible. It's not saying something about the real world just by making a copy of it in a virtual world. It's making the unshown shown. It's showing you something through a process that you wouldn't see if you didn't follow the process. So it's doing it by an analogy or a metaphor. It's not doing it simply by showing you it and saying, aha, but look, these things here are the same. You can do that with a painting. You don't need a virtual world for that. Now, because it's indirect, almost all the statements about reality that you want to make are going to be within the fiction. So breaking the fiction to talk about reality isn't really going to let you talk about reality. So although this is a legitimate reason, it's not as powerful as you'd expect, because it undercuts itself. Now, I did say it's almost always, but there are occasions when you can put something in from reality and it will be treated as part of the fiction. And that is by making the fiction be part of the reality. See, to be out of fiction, the reference to reality will have to be of reality. Therefore, if you make the fiction of the game world that it's set in reality, then you can put things in to comment on reality, which are also within fiction. Augmented reality games usually do it the other way around. They make reality the game rather than make the game reality, but it could work. The virtual world that the MMO that springs to mind for this is The Secret World, which is has a fiction which says that the real world is manipulated by groups of people who are keeping the full horrors of it away from us, because society would collapse if we knew what was going on. But even so, even though that could do this, it nevertheless makes its comments through metaphor and analogy, rather than just straight up saying these evil corporations are oil companies. It makes the evil corporations be high-tech companies of a vague nature. Now, games can, if you want, make a flat-out statement about the real world through the medium of their gameplay. Edutainment games will do that. You can have research games, and there have been research MMOs, not many, that have been trying to make a point through the gameplay. But if they do that, then they become offshoots of reality. They're saying something about reality, but in so doing, they tie themselves to it in a way that makes them just be part of it. The whole thing about immersion in a virtual world is that it's where you get to be yourself away from the real world or reality. So if you want to say something about the real world in the virtual world, you should use that as the basis for your fiction. If you don't want to say something about the real world or about the virtual world itself, if you don't want to say anything in the virtual world, then why are you making it? Why would you make a game if you don't want to say something through it? Why would you do that? When you design a virtual world, an MMO, you are saying something to your players, whether you like it or not. And if you've got nothing to say, there'll be nothing to play. It will be bland. It will be not necessarily incoherent, but it will lack integrity. It will say nothing. And if it says nothing, why should anybody listen? So, nearly at the end now. Summarize then. Realisticness is what players expect to see when the fiction says they should see it. And it's also what they expect to see when the fiction says nothing, but the default fiction does say it. So you want something to be realistic, either because the fiction says this is real in this context, or the fiction says nothing, but the backup default one, which is either reality or another MMO, does say something. Normally, the non-fiction is the world we live in, but it can be the game genre that you're using. But if your game isn't realistic, then the players won't, and in fact won't be able to trust you. So any story you've got is sunk because they can't make any predictions about the causal links between events. And also, which if you've got anything at all to say, you won't be able to say it if the players can't trust you. Okay, and that's the talk over. So this is where normally I would bow and take all the applause, but sadly that doesn't happen on Zoom. So I'll stop and so many comments.
So I guess, so for all the attendees right now, you can start posting your questions. You can raise your hand as well using the reactions so that we know you have a question to ask and we'll unmute you. But for Richard, I think what they've been discussing just before you finish is kind of interesting. Is one of them, Taja, has mentioned that, has asked, is it then a little world-breaking in Star Wars with names like Luke and Ben with the logic that you've presented?
Well, it is, but for the fiction, you have to translate it into using an interface that the audience can understand, and the giving human-like names to characters in Star Wars obviously it doesn't make sense. That said, you can cover it. Tolkien said for Lord of the Rings that it had been translated into the common tongue, and that's why people called Meriadoc were called Merry, and so that does give an explanation. So yes, Star Wars doesn't present that, but then Star Wars has only got 90 minutes. So although it does have you can understand why they would do it. Yes, it does. If you're being very picky about it, it does break the fiction. But people have watched so many movies where characters do have pronounceable names that's now their default. It's part of the vocabulary of the movie making that characters are going to have names that make sense for the audience, so they can identify them.
So there's another question from Christopher. So his question is, how do you find a balance between being artsy and meaningful versus leaving the familiar narrative and formula so that your players feel comfortable while being engaged with a story of quality and artistic integrity?
Oh wow, where was that written down? Is that near the top or near the bottom, or isn't that in the comments?
It's the newest one in the chat.
Oh, right at the very bottom, one new message.
Yeah.
How do I find a balance between being artsy and meaningful? Leaving the familiar narrative and formula so your players feel comfortable. Right, so games typically use the wrong kind of art. If you play an art game, that's like a red flag saying, do not play this game. This game here says, look, we have these characters here that you all thought were this kind, but no, look, they're like this, haha. That's not through the gameplay. The gameplay is what carries the message. And if you've got something to say, then you're saying it through the gameplay. You can't help but say things through the gameplay. Anyway, the best thing to do is to figure what it is you want to say that you can articulate through the gameplay, because if you could articulate it in words, you wouldn't bother with the gameplay. And then whenever you need to make a decision that's not clear, consult your artistic statement and say, what is it I'm trying to say? And then it will drop out. And it really does drop out. That kind of deferring to your own vision of what you want to say that you can only say through the gameplay will make it far easier for all your other decisions to work, and they'll all fit, they'll all lock in because they're all subservient to that idea. So trying too hard to be artistic, you're getting in your own way. Don't say, how can I be artistic with this? Say, what is it that I want this game to tell the players? What am I trying to get across? Am I trying to get across principles of freedom, principles of identity? Am I trying to get across principles of oppressive powers? What am I trying to get across that I want to say to the players? And then you don't think, well, how can I do that? You just create your game, and anything that comes along that doesn't look like that, you don't put in it. The composer Dvorak was once asked, how do you create such beautiful melodies? And his reply was, I just think of all possible melodies and throw away the ones that aren't beautiful. And that's what it is with the art of designing for MMOs or any games, is put in what fits, what has the beauty and fits your message. Got there. Do you believe that writers have to or profit from having a concrete message? The message doesn't, I wouldn't say write it down in text, but you have to have in your head an idea of what you're trying to say. So when I and Roy Trubshaw worked on Mud, the progenitor of today's MMOs, back in 1978, we were saying things about freedom. We didn't like how the real world worked, so we wanted to make a better world. So we did. And we were trying through the gameplay to enable people to be and become themselves. But we never discussed using words. We have to have this. We need to have this here. Why does it have to be there? It just has to be there because it's flowing through what we're doing. We know what we're doing is something vaguely to do with freedoms, but whether it's to do with freedom of identity, freedom of speech, what freedom, we just play the game and you'll understand was the answer. So we knew what we wanted to say, but we had to say, we wanted to say it through processes because that was our medium of expression. So yes, when you say lots of them work subconsciously with their conflicts, having real world analogies, that's it. Yes, you're working through a dialectic. You've got something that you are struggling with about the real world, or about yourself, or about your family, or about some craft to do with virtual worlds. And the way to work through that is to create the game, to create the gameplay, and that's how you yourself manage to understand what it is you're trying to say. Maybe you get a better story world if you're aware of what it is from the start. Yeah, you do need to have some awareness, but the awareness doesn't have to be in the form of, I shall write a vision statement. You can write, these are some of the things that are important. I've got an inkling why, but maybe some of them I don't. You can put things like that down and that will help form your ideas. But ultimately, it's the game that's going to tell people what you're thinking. I'm a bit curious about your opinion on just for fun games like Angry Birds or Mario Kart. Well, they are saying things. The symbolism isn't necessarily important for these things. Quite often when people do analyses of games, they don't look at the procedural rhetoric, they look at the visual rhetoric, and then they get it wrong because, you know, Angry Birds, well, what is it about birds? It doesn't really matter. The fact it's birds is just telling you it's a casual game. Mario Kart, well, it's Mario because you wouldn't buy the game if it was Mario. But what's saying there? Well, that's essentially saying anyone can win, because if you're in the lead, you're going to get taken down by the people behind you. Anyone can win, and that's a statement that's perfectly good. It's a short game, short statement, and that's pretty well what it's saying. When I look at student projects, particularly group projects, it's quite often easy to see what they're saying, even though the students themselves don't know. Sometimes I look at a design and say, okay, somebody here is being shunned by the rest of the group, because look, the idea of this game you've got here is to get these 4 people from this one side of the board to the other side of the board, and there's this one person in the middle, this big monster that's trying to stop you. Why are you making that game? Well, that's because you're a new group. There's only 4 or 5 of you, and one of you is not getting on, and the others regard you as an obstacle, and that's what you're saying here. And yeah, that is what they were saying. They just didn't think about it. Or here is a chariot game. There are 4 horses dragging around a chariot. And what's that saying? It's a chariot racing game. Well, why you got 4 horses there? Well, chariots have 4 horses. Yeah, but there are 4 of you. Wasn't there supposed to be 5 in this group? Yeah, but one of us left. Ah, so basically the other 4 had to pull together. When did you choose to have a chariot? Oh, it was after the other guy left. Yes, well, okay, so you can quite often, if you just try and read a game, it's not hard often to pick up what was being said. The exceptions are games which are designed by committees, which typically are very difficult to read because they're incoherent, or what they say is just repetition of what's already been said. Or games by designers for experimental purposes, where they don't expect it to be saying anything. They're doing it because it's made a toy game to try something out. Or if it's a game by someone who isn't actually very good at game design yet, and hasn't really thought through what they're doing. Wow, that's a really weird reading of Mario Kart. Well, yeah, you can make your own reading of Mario Kart, because once a work of art is out there, anybody can read it how they want. Once it's released, then it's up to the reader to read it and to interpret it. Was it from Kotaku? No, I just said that just now because somebody mentioned that. I never thought of how it worked before, so yeah. Teaching players not to damage the environment. Oh, that's what that was referring to. By staying only on the track, no going off the road, mushroom. Well, the thing is, if you start using symbols as symbols, then it gets a bit too heavy, and you do get the rather in your face art games that typically were made when people from other arts came along and decided to try and show how computer games were really art by doing things that were nothing to do with the art of computer games. Oh, let's look back for some more questions here, because I've been talking about artsy things and some other things about Luke and Ben. I mean to say, for an Asian Persian, they do carry a certain connotation. There's fictional universes. But yeah, when you've got a universe that you create, if you're going to build a new world, a new society, so many times people base it on the real world. So you'll travel across the seas and there'll be something like the Aztecs, or there'll be something like ancient Rome if ancient Rome hadn't fallen and they'd reached the Middle Ages. Well, beyond the Middle Ages, because they did reach it in the Eastern Empire. But you come across these things and they're just the real world dressed up. These people here are just like Japanese samurai. Why? You've got this carte blanche. You can create anything you want, any society you want. This is a world where everybody wears masks. This is a world where children are bought and sold, and they don't find out who their parents are until they're 12 and the last person who. There's all sorts of strange things you can do with societies where you think this could conceivably have worked. Why do you have to pull on the real world? And yet people do. It's as if they lack inspiration. Why would you go for stereotypes? Why are all the martial arts people always from some country which is a bit like the Far East? It's it's a lack of imagination on the part of the designers, and trying to pass it off as being, oh well, people will feel more familiar with it if it's like real world Nigeria. Well, no, people won't feel more familiar with it. All they feel is that you've ripped off real world Nigeria and put it in your game. So you can have a world that's got realistic aspects to it without having to copy parts of the real world wholesale and then twist them a bit so that they're a little different. Hey guys, why don't we have, instead of the ancient Egyptians building pyramids, why don't they build like big circular towers? Oh yeah, big deal. It doesn't really help. Chocobos are superior to bikes, just saying, well, I suppose you can't have bikes fight each other, so yeah. There are both monocles and pince nez in Final Fantasy. Yeah, I didn't spot any monocles on Mikoti when I looked through, but I think there could well be. But when I was zooming through all my saved photos, I didn't spot any. But I've certainly seen them on other characters.
I think there was one last question that was not related to your presentation, but more related to Final Fantasy. I think Jonas had asked whether you were excited about something.
Oh, where's that?
I'm trying to find the... Yeah, so nothing to do with the presentation itself. Jonas was wondering, how hyped are you for the Endwalker expansion?
Not at all, really. I stopped playing Final Fantasy about 2 months ago, maybe. Maybe it was 1 month ago. I'll probably start playing it again in February, January, something like that, maybe. But no, I'm not. I don't play it as a player. I play it as a game designer. So I'll just wait till it comes out and everyone else can have the fun, and then I'll go in and see what's happened and what they've done, how they've changed the things that were seriously in need of changing, what new things they've put in which don't. I'll also be interested, although not particularly, and in fact I will not enjoy seeing that dreadful Xenos guy meet his bitter end, because he'd better do, because if he doesn't, then that's that. I shall not be playing anymore. But so I'm not hyped for it, but and I never hyped for any of these MMOs, because for a game designer, for an MMO designer, a lot of what I will get out of it, I'll be able to get out of it in a day's play. The only reason for keeping playing is to give myself credentials, so that I can say, look, here's all these cat people I noticed. Look, yes, I did do that special quest for jewel making or whatever it was that you don't normally see, but you do, and that's where the cat gets the glasses. So it gives me material I can talk about. Recently, I've been playing Crowfall, unlike everybody else. That's a game which has issues, bright shining issues which aren't going to go away, but yeah, so I've played that enough that I can now throw in references to Crowfall if I need to bring up a point. But likewise, before Final Fantasy I was playing or between the last two Final Fantasies, I think I was playing Elite Dangerous, which is when they say it's a mile wide and an inch deep, then they are not kidding. But nevertheless, because the whole game's a grind to me, I can grind these things. If I'm going to be playing, I'll be grinding. What's that say? Top 3 MMOs. Is that from the point of view of design? Or well, it'd have to be, because that's what top 3 MMO RPGs. by which I suppose you mean graphical virtual worlds of a game nature. Okay, Secret World, EVE Online, and would I say it's a toss-up between the original World of Warcraft, before the stupid thing they did with all the power potion stuff that they have. Anyway, original World of Warcraft was pretty good. That was quite well designed, quite coherent. Final Fantasy 14 is all right, but it's got that. Please sit aside for the next 30 minutes where we'll be showing you a cutscene that, this is a game I don't want to be playing. So yeah, probably original World of Warcraft, maybe up until about pre-Cataclysm. It was going all right, but then when they introduced Cataclysm, but then the pandas came in and then the wheels fell off. Okay, well, anyway, so those are my top three. So
I guess that kind of answered. Does that
I can
answer the next question?
Rambling for ages if people want to ask me questions. It's which questions to answer. Do you think the lack of creativity regarding worlds could also come from a fear of having to create additional details or context? I don't know if it's fear, because fear would mean that the people creating the details weren't confident. If you're going to be creating a virtual world, then your only fear is not having time. But the lack of creativity is more to do with the expense it takes to make these things. If you're going to be creative, by nature, you're going to be taking risks. And if you take risks, sometimes they don't work. And if they don't work, then someone's lost $30 million and they'll be cross. So the risk taking is in part because of the financial implications of failure. And therefore, if you're going to create a world with some creativity in it, it's either going to be down at the low level where it doesn't really make a big difference to the gameplay, it just makes it have a different atmosphere, or it's going to be one big thing that you're using as a unique selling point for the game. I know some writers tend not necessarily to become lazy, but almost despise having to provide background context because either they don't know what to add to their world or don't think it's necessary. Oh, well, why are you creating a world if you don't want to create a world? Create something else. But people who create virtual worlds, it's just the latest, more concrete way of creating worlds. People have been creating worlds for centuries. They paracosms is what they're called. So Lord of the Rings is a paracosm. So was Utopia, Sir Thomas More's Utopia. These are worlds that are built to be self-contained realities, and they're meant to be there as alternatives to the real reality. Lots of children create paracosms. There's, well, I mean, I could give you half a lecture on paracosms if you like, but a lot of famous authors created paracosms. The Bronte sisters, who they created paracosms among themselves when they were younger, and in being able to create the realities, they were able to populate them, those realities. And then when it came to writing a story, they could just pull out of nowhere a world, a fully realized world, and maybe it's based on the Yorkshire Moors or not, but whatever it's based on, having built worlds, they're able to do that and turn it to their advantage. So if you've never built a world for any purpose, well, maybe building worlds isn't where your artistic direction lies. Maybe your artistic direction lies in specific games or specific genres of games, which are able to say things, I don't know, about space or relationships that you can't easily say in a virtual world, but you can in your chosen one. Maybe they're to do with decisions, or to do with the way particular minorities are treated by majorities. Maybe they're to do with bridging cultures. Whatever it is, it doesn't have to be a virtual world. It might be much better said another way. It might be better said as a novel. But if you are going to be making worlds, then it's probably an idea to make some independently. When I was a child, I used to make worlds. I made several long-term paracosms, which would be embarrassing if I was to describe them, but some of them were. I mean, one of them was where I used to draw maps on pieces of paper about this big, because people used to write letters back when I was a kid, and I'd stick maybe, I don't know, 30 or 40 of these together with sticky tape, turn it over because you can't use felt tips on sticky tape, and then I'd draw a big map of a hidden continent, and then I'd start writing things. I'd put mountains in, had some vague idea of rivers run from mountains to the sea, and I'd put in swamps and things, and I'd think, oh, maybe deserts, they normally go around about here, if this would be like where this is on Earth. And yeah, okay, so I'd never done tectonic realistic in that sense, but I was building a world based on what a 12-year-old boy knew of the real world. And having built that world, then what I did was I wrote a diary of a character who's an explorer going into this strange world, taking with him a group of other his team of people, and he's trying to find mountains or gold or tribes or cures for illnesses, whatever. He's going into this thing. So yeah, it's a colonialist approach, but when you're 12 in 1972, then that's that's how the world was. So I used to write this diary as I went through, and afterwards you read the diary, the words are dead on the page. But while I was doing it, I was building in my mind this world, and this world was real. Now, having done that exercise a number of times, because for me that was fun, that meant that when it came to writing something like Mud or any other world-oriented game, it was a lot easier because I'd done it and I wanted to do it and I knew what I wanted to do. It was a case of, what do I want to say with it? Now, if you haven't built paracosms, or you did, but then you grew out of it, which my brother did, then you'll be using your knowledge a different way. You'll be saying different things. You'll be expressing different ideas or different concepts, or saying different things about yourself, about other people. I'm not saying that virtual worlds are the only legitimate avenue for artistic expression. I'm just saying that if you're writing one, then you better be using it as a way of expressing something, because otherwise your world will be boring. Right, sorry to have ranted at you there, or rambled at least.
Oh, good. I think they enjoyed it. Because Hannah's actually said that, for the record, they'll like the lecture on paracosms. However, we have run over time by about 15 minutes. So I think it's a good time to wrap up. So would they be able to reach you anywhere?
Oh, yeah.
If they want to ask more questions or have more discussions?
So there's my email address in the chat. So yeah, if you want to come along and tell me I'm wrong, then yeah, go ahead. Happy. I like talking about games, and I often am wrong, except for that last statement, which obviously is right. So yeah, I'm happy to talk.
So the email address is in the chat for those of you who have not discovered where it is yet. And I will send this out via your Eventbrite registration as well, so you can have access to the email address. This has been recorded as well. So once it is live and public on YouTube, we will let you know as well. And you can then share this with your classmates, schoolmates, your friends, whoever else as well. And if you are interested in joining IGDA Sweden, I have posted the link to the Discord server somewhere up in the chat. I will post it again. And you can keep going on with the discussions over there. Doesn't matter if you're not based in Sweden, even though we are IGDA Sweden, just feel free to jump in and have a chat with everyone. All right, okay. Thank you, Richard, for hosting and for the talk and preparing all this and giving us some insights into world design and how you think about the world. And I hope everyone who's attended this enjoys it as well. Okay, all right, so see y'all.
Bye.
Bye.